Who are the evil people that won in history? The British royal family, and much differently. But since they won, they get to write the history books, and people conveniently turn a blind eye to the evil that they have committed as head of arguably one of the most evil empires. The Japanese and Germans were evil, but that doesn't mean the British were not also evil. Life is not black and white. It is not always simply good versus bad. Looks like the Brits found this. The fact I got downvoted is proof of my claim. The family literally have a cult following. Augustus. He was actually a pretty good emperor. He wasn't evil in the sense that he killed tens of thousands for his enjoyment, but if it was advantages for him to kill thousands, he wasn't thinking for a second. So once he was on top and everyone did whatever he wanted anyway, he became a good leader. His way to the top, however, was covered in blood. The only reasons he is remembered as a good leader is because he outlived almost everyone who was already adult when he made his way up the Roman ladder. If he had died after 10 years or something, he would be hated. I'll drop an obscure one: the Anatolian Neolithic farmers versus the Western hunter-gatherers. They effectively commit mass genocide against the WHGs throughout Europe and almost entirely displace them in most of the continent. All this happened about 5,000 years ago. Sure, they were ultimately displaced by the Indo-Europeans, but not as much as they eliminated the WHGs. And genetic pockets of Anatolian Neolithic farmers still exist, like in Sardinia and Corsica. The WHGs are effectively extinct outside of genetic substrates across northern Europe. Kim Jong-il. He lived in the lap of luxury, while the vast majority of his country lived in abject poverty. Had a film collection of 20,000 movies, including Western films that were illegal for anyone else to own. Fucked any woman he wanted. Was infallible and worshipped by the very people he was oppressing. That slimy little fucker enjoyed all of the luxuries imported from capitalist nations, which were illegal for everybody else in the country. Unbridled capitalists. The people who believe in profit over all and exploitation without restriction. They've been winning for 600 years and show no signs yet of slowing down. Market competition is good. Ling it back to us for dollars. Or dumping chemical waste into rivers. Bankrupting families for insulin. Or using child labor. These things should not be permitted in the pursuit of shareholder value. But they are. And it's somehow celebrated. Genghis Khan. Oda Nobunaga, though how evil he actually was is debatable, as well as how much he won. Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Kim Jong-il, Castro, and pretty much any communist dictator I can't think of at the moment. Attila the Hun. We'll never know what the Pope said to him, but it's the only reason why he stopped. Vlad the Impaler. Good reason this guy is considered the origin of Dracula. This is just off the top of my head and doesn't include people groups like the Vikings or Spanish conquistadors. A Catholic Church during the Spanish Inquisition. The Romans during their conquests. The Zulu during their rampage. The Europeans during the colonial era. And pretty much every conqueror in human history. Conquest was always mass murder romanticized by the killers. Reagan. Had the CIA sell crack to black neighborhoods to raise secret funds to give to Iran, destroy black neighborhoods and families, gave rise to the projects and has overshadowed US black culture for decades to come. Also, helped get rid of insane asylum funding, which flooded the streets with mentally ill homeless. Economic depression, causing stock buybacks legal again, which is why we have a short-term investor-driven economy resulting in massive layoffs without any real notice. Most people in history are evil in one way or another by modern standards. Gandhi was a sex pest pedophile. A good chunk of the US founding fathers owned slaves. Pretty much anyone who was ever a king, lord, or held any power, allowed horrific punishments like being quartered or imprisoned people for life in horrible conditions that were worse than death. I think it would be harder to find someone whose hands are entirely clean. Augusto Pinochet, without being tried for multiple charges of human rights violations including wrongful detention, physical torture, sexual abuse, psychological repression, and just plain murder and illegal enrichment. Then there's King Leopold II of the Belgian Congo, with the rubber plantations. Don't Google this asshole if you have a weak stomach. Reagan remembered fondly despite relying on horoscopes and being incapacitated most of his presidency, responsible for most of the problems not just in America but in the world. Never served time for being a traitor with a wrong contra. We must strip his name from everything, starting with the airport, and remove his remains from Arlington. Mother Teresa, our name is basically called upon like Jesus, for she was a cruel, mean-spirited monster who caused suffering to untold numbers. Because she believed that suffering and only suffering could get you to God. She's an evil bitch, but people still act like she was a saint. It's gross. The Iroquois had a 15-generation rule. They would base their policies on how it would benefit their descendants 15 generations later. Also, the genocide of many other Native American cultures would lead me to believe that all of the leaders in the USA could be considered. Joseph Mengele, or of death, who escaped Germany to South America, started a family and despite being hunted by the US, German and Israeli governments for decades, didn't even hide his identity. By the end of his life, he drowned and after having a stroke in 1979. The United States during the Mexican-American War, slave holders fighting Mexico that banned slavery for the right to keep having slaves. Crockett, Houston, Austin, and all those human shit stains first stole Tejas. Then professional idiot James Polk launched the invasion. Almost all historically praised conquerors are essentially evil winners who write the history books. They find peace, destroy the status quo of orderly life with war and its associated horrors, then try for recreating peaceful order until another evil sub doesn't again. Oh, and the legendary figure in the UK that was responsible for the Bengal famine was racist, anti-Semitic and Islamophobic, sent the army against striking miners and was corrupt and took bribes constantly. Mitch McConnell, he is one of the most corrupt partisan politicians ever held office. He's retiring at the end of this year, and he will never be held to account for all of the harm his policies and actions have caused. For the most part, we'll never know because they are the people dictating the history books. It says here in this history book that luckily, the good guys have won every single time. What are the odds? Norm Macdonald. Anyone who's still currently in power has most definitely done some evil things to get to where they are. The weak, honorable, and just do not hold positions of power. And the sooner you realize that, the better. I'd say the Forbes richest people list is a great start. Every one of them could be changing the world for the better with their vast resources, but they choose to hoard like a dragon, or the vast majority suffer. The Southern state leadership and legislatures after the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction. Our current political atmosphere is a consequence of their failing to be held accountable to the law and decency. A lot of these comments aren't people who won, but people who lost and just didn't get the punishment people thought they deserved. But a real evil winner. Try the Dole Company and what they did with Hawaii. Winston Churchill starved millions in Bengal, sent the black and tans to terrorize and murder Irish civilians. An evil man who is widely regarded as a good guy because of the evil of those he fought in WW2. Stalin terrorist his way to controlling one of the largest empires of all time and wielded absolute, despotic power. Sure, nature eventually got him, but she gets us all, so I think he got away with it. George W. Bush won in 2004. He was evil, lied to American people about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, so he can start a war for oil, ended up killing hundreds of thousands if not over 1 million people. The US government, like seriously, they committed genocide and almost eradicated an entire population of people, the indigenous people, and they are considered the richest country in the world. Dick Cheney, I always bring him up, evil man, and will die never having been punished for his crimes and even still getting paid, protected and revered by our government. Francisco Franco. The story of the Spanish Civil War is basically a military coup that won, leading to a fascist regime ruling Spain until its leader's natural death decades later. Jimmy Savile. One of his victims once escaped him, ran into the lobby, and shouted that Sovel was attempting to assault her. The people there simply laughed and mocked her. I talked about this with a group of friends not too long ago. The early settlement days in America were definitely evil when you consider how we got the land from the natives. Stalin and Mao, often they are not even considered that evil. I think it's mainly because their time in power was so close to Hitler's time in charge, leaving them in his shadow. Mao Zedong, he killed 30 million people and tortured much more. His picture is still hanging at the Tiananmen Square, worshipped by 1.4 billion brainwashed human beings. Stalin died of natural causes and was never brought to justice. Same with Mao. Idi Amin basically got away with it. Same with Robert Mugabe. Loads of shitheads. European imperialism. Ethnic cleansing of Native Americans. Ethnic cleansing of Australian Aboriginals. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians by modern Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, because he is responsible for 30.0 innocent children and women death. The weird thing is, when you speak this, they tell you are a Nazi. Steve Bannon and Roger Stone were both sentenced to prison for their federal crimes, that had their convictions pardoned by fellow criminal buddy Donnie John. Iranian theocrats, almost half a century later, still in power and causing a lot of trouble in the region, in addition to oppressing their own people. Every US president, as Noam Chomsky put it, if the Nuremberg laws were applied, then every post-war American president would have been hanged. The ones that got rich off the backs of everyone else, they still do. They are now billionaires and are hoarding the majority of the world's wealth. Reading all of these people makes me hope that there is a literal hell, so they can be tormented for eternity and beyond.